Morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss, again here at allpointstv.com and also 92.1. This WFOV, the great radio station that is heralded by the great visionary here in Flint, and that is Mr. Paul Herring, who's doing a wonderful job over there. Although last weekend they had my program starting at the midway point. John, they had us starting the midway point last week, and then they went back to the beginning of it.
I've done stuff like that.
All in, but it was kind of like in reverse mode.
I've done that before because audiophiles sometimes are like, will skip ahead when you go to play them, and maybe he's busy. He's the one person doing it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like it could be. I can understand the. I mean, it's unfortunate.
It was
but I can
still a very
understand
good program, I thought, that we did, and your contribution, John, was always the climax of the show. I'm just here to fill in the gaps, and I'm here to make sure that we go on time. We're glad to have you with us today. We're starting again on Monday. We were doing a different program on a different day, not a different program, but a different day last week because of the holiday. Again, I hope you had a nice 4th of July, and all of the family members were there, and you were celebrating the nation's birthday. We are, let's see how many years old we are. How many years are we old, John, from 1776?
241, isn't it?
240, let's see, this is 242. 242.
242. I remember when it was. I remember it was the 200th year. I remember that big celebration.
And I'm not going to tell anybody how old I am because I'm not trying to throw that information out there for the public consumption.
But all we can say he is pretty much a contemporary of Lincoln. But no.
But I wasn't back there in the time period in which they were writing the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution later on. So we were having on the 4th of July. We were doing a program with Tom Sommer, who has a very good program that comes on this network, WFOV, and he airs 5 days a week from 9 to 12. And last Wednesday, he had the candidates, most of the candidates, not all of them were there, but most of the candidates that are running in the 49th District. And we had a very good time in terms of raising some of the issues with the candidates. Looking forward to the outcome of the primary. John, let me ask you this about the president's announcement tonight. You know, the president's going to announce tonight his nominee for the Supreme Court. Do you have any winners in there? Do you like them all, or what?
I did hear Troy Gowdy's name bounce out. I don't know if that's the official.
No, he's not even going to be considered. I'm glad he's not.
But yeah,
he's a turncoat.
But no, I haven't heard of. I actually don't. All I know is I'm going to hear progressives' heads explode because in his term there's a possibility he can be appointing up to 3 different Supreme Court justices. And God, I just like to see that because I just like to see these people fade away because they just can't handle reality anymore.
Boy, is that ever true, John? The left has lost his mind.
The thing is, they're so angry that people are voted for him, yet we want to go back to what the Constitution, because it would be the better way of doing things. They want to be progressive. They think their vision is, they're multimillionaires who've never really worked for a living, the bulk of these people, and that they think they can predict and tell us what our lives should be like and what we should accept. Yeah, then they pride themselves and they go act. And most of them are actors, and they go onto a role. They go out and they play somebody who's really one of us. Yeah. And they're like, oh, look how great of a job they did. Why don't you get the real people to actually do this daily to portray people who are actually not normal people? Because these people are not. I think there's something wrong with actors. I think you take roles on so many that you actually just get so subdivided from your reality that you don't know what your home base is anymore.
John, you define them as actors. You think that it's all an act, or?
I think 95% of whatever they say and do is act. I can't. There's no. I've seen it locally. I mean, when you're talking on the pressure on being a national or international scale, yeah, that's all they are as performers. I don't think they have an understanding of who they really are anymore. After being in those roles so long, they have sold themselves out so many times just to get further ahead. Politics is a major kind of an issue. It's a dilemma. You do this so you can get power, and you're supposed to represent a core group of people, and you're supposed to represent them. But after a while, you mix it up so much, you no longer have a center. You no longer have a moral center for yourself. I think that's the reason why most of them are depressed. I think most of them see shrinks because they sell their own souls out.
That's interesting.
To get that. It's a horrific process. It's horrific.
I don't have I guess everybody knows my view of politicians. I just don't have any confidence in anything they say. My view is not all that different from Dr. Walter Williams at Georgetown, or is it George Mason? I think it's
George Mason. Yep.
George Mason University. And Dr. Williams says the way you can tell when a politician is lying is to watch to see when they move their lips. And when they're moving their lips and they're talking, then they're lying.
If they're quiet, they're thinking about things to lie about.
And that must be a horrible existence, as you were saying, John, because if you have to wear a mask all the time, because if people knew how you really thought and what you really stood for, you probably would not be elected. So politics is really, and they say that politics is an art of compromise. I think politics is an art of deception. You know,
Did you ever read that book about the rules of rules of power? I mean, a guy named Green, I think it was Brian Greene who wrote it. He wrote several books, and basically he drew from historical sources about the nature of power, how to use power. Of course, he quoted heavily Machiavelli and other, political theorists and military strategists. So I mean, basically, it is amoral. That's what Machiavelli shocked the sensibilities when he wrote The Prince, because people were just struck by the fact it was amoral. But he is like, for example, we have both the left and the right trying to use Christianity. Okay, like Christ would want you to do this. Left now who's mocked Christians for years. They think they have enough knowledge about what it is to be a Christian, so they can use it as a rope around Christians' necks. The right does the same thing too. Thing is, once you start introducing political power with Christianity usually comes up suffering. Because it's not about social justice. Christianity is not just solely about social justice. If people were motivated on their individual level to motivate to enact their lives on that, you would have fewer problems in a social justice level. You would need social justice warriors.
Would you define politics as the art of deception?
Deception and intrigue and let's see, backstabbing, clandestine activities. That's what they are.
Yeah, I was reading this book again. When I go through these books, sometimes I don't underscore, and I go back through it again to underscore some of the main points. I was reading this book by Charles Adams again called Those Dirty Rotten Taxes. We were talking about this book last week as we went off the air. And one of the points that Adams is making, he's actually quoting Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine was saying that government at best is a necessary evil. Now, if that's at best what government is, then you can imagine at the worst what government would be. And he says that it is what it is in terms of at best being a necessary evil because of the ones who manage government. And the government, once it is set up, the framers thought that once you set government up, then you have to of course, you set government up to stop the bully, but when you set government up to stop the bully, you have to then turn around and stop the government from being a legal instrument that mimics the bully. So you have to then restrain government after government is set up to restrain those who would do you harm because you are outnumbered or outmuscled by the bully that is bigger than you are as an individual. Collectively, the idea is that you can then corral the energy of the bully and control it so he or she does not do the harm to the community that they could do to those persons acting as individuals. But collectively, we're stronger, and government will, in fact, give us a voice in which we can have our rights, in fact, respected. The problem is that then those that get in power, and there are no examples otherwise, where when government then is set up, that the power is not abused, and basically the abuse is the power of the purse. And the framers try to fix both those problems by, first of all, disarrogating power, and then limiting the ability of the government to tax people and to direct. In fact, there were no direct taxes allowed in the Constitution. Was originally, when it's originally written. I'm really looking forward as we continue this experiment for however long it lasts, and I'm not sure if we can go down this road continuously and arrive at a very good end if we don't get some control of what's happening here in this country. This experiment can be very abruptly brought to a halt, as all democracies before them, all republics before them, have been brought to a halt because of the kind of turning on each other inside of these states. You have liberty, but the liberty oftentimes is abused by the screamers. And the screamers in this case, in my view, the screamers are the liberals. And we're going to see a lot of it once Donald Trump makes his nomination public tonight. I think it's going to be at 9 o'clock tonight. Once he makes that no matter who he has as his nominee, and I wrote down some of the names of the ones that I think I do have an idea of who should come through, but my view is the one I would like to see, to be honest with you, for a reason that probably would not be part of the discussion that's in that room as Donald Trump begins to make his final judgment. I'd like to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett get it. She's of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and although she's only been on the court about 8 months and doesn't have a very extensive resume, I think that what's going to happen once we get the person confirmed, I think we're going to see them going after Roe v. Wade. And this verdict that was passed down by the court by a 7-2 margin right before Anthony Kennedy took on before he was appointed to the court. Lewis Powell was in that seat, and it was a 7-2 verdict in terms of them ruling Roe v. Wade, the right to an abortion, was made a national part of the nation. The nation began to embrace as a national embodiment of its dogma, and I just don't think that that verdict can be sustained based upon the delegation of powers to the federal government. I'm against abortion. I guess everybody knows that that's listening to this program. I'm against. I think abortion has to be called what it is. I think what we're doing in this country, as you were crying about the children being separated from their parents at the border, I think what we're doing in this country is that we're murdering children. And because of the way the state is set up, the only thing the state has any interest in are those persons who are raised as taxpayers in this country, and the ones in the womb obviously not paying their taxes, and they're not really full citizens for 18 years after their birth. So they're very vulnerable until they're able to exercise some political involvement in the system that governs their life. And I don't think that we can call it choice all we want to. Where we actually have, in this country, we have had the equivalent of 10 times the Holocaust they had in Nazi Germany. 6 million Jews were allegedly killed in Nazi Germany between 1933 and 1945. That's a 12-year period. We've had Roe v. Wade since 1973, and from 1973 to 2018, we've had 60 million children aborted in this country. And I was, in fact, arguing that with one of the persons on the panel this past 4th of July, and the person was saying, was reminding me that I was a man, and wanted me to get my, I guess my words out of that person, out of the women's, privacy, most private parts. And and they don't mind the government being involved and telling them they have the right to abortion. The government is involved in the bedroom by sanctioning that. They have no problem with the government being involved in as long as it sanctions what they're doing.
I was wrong. I was young when Roe v. Wade, was announced, and I've heard people who are conservatives say that denounced it is because it was just based up on bad law. Basically, it was done by activists, pushed through the court system. It wasn't to give a chance to have a public hearing. Is that correct? That basically the Supreme Court basically ruled that in private, and it was like being argued in relative private. I mean, the public didn't have a chance to actually get legislators involved or anything else. It was a interpretation that some people think was a severe stretch, of the Bill of Rights and all that. So, what was your take on that?
In Roe v. Wade, Jane Roe had gotten pregnant, and the law was that she was not allowed to have an abortion. She took her to the Supreme Court. By the way, John, by the time that the court ruled upon the Roe v. Wade issue in '73, which I think that was in November, if I'm not mistaken, November of 1973. By the time that the ruling was made, Jane Roe had a child. Are you aware of that, right, John? And once she met the child, and today she is against the Roe. She's the one that caused Roe v. Wade case to be ruled upon by the court, but she's against the ruling now because after having met the child on the other side and saw what a beautiful child she had and the love and the joy that they've shared over the years, she came out against Roe v. Wade.
I think she passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah, I think so.
But I mean,
but isn't that interesting though that how the person that brought the case to the court and was the reason why the court had the ruling that it had? Isn't it interesting that at the end of the verdict, by the time the verdict was issued, she had changed her mind because she met the person that they were claiming, and this is what they are claiming. They're claiming that they have the right to control their own body.
Another thing is too, I think she was, from what I understand, the telling I heard, she was used by activists. Basically, her case was used as this catalyst, to do this test case, basically, which ultimately ended in the ruling they did get. Basically, it was bad. I mean, it was definitely done, motivated by. She was used. That's why my impression from the story, the way it's told to me, she was used by these activists, and she regretted that her role.
She did.
I did hear that.
And you think that's had any bearing upon the way the country sees Roe v. Wade? Half the country is going to be fighting over this nomination because they know that Roe v. Wade is going to be challenged. There's going to be a test case going before the Supreme Court. Somebody's going to come back and challenge it under these new judges. And the prediction is not hard to predict what's going to happen with a 5-4 verdict with 5 solid conservatives on the court. And really, it might be the four members of the court that are liberals there: Stephen Breyer, Eleanor Kagan, the need to be gone 85-year-old Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's sitting on the bench and she doesn't know what's going on, and then Sonia Sotomayor. Those four liberals are going to be outnumbered and outmatched by 5 members of the court who are going to be pretty much in the corner of the conservative realm of the court. Pretty much going to be ruling more so than what Kennedy did. Kennedy was like a swing vote on the court. Sometimes he would vote with the conservatives, sometimes he would not vote with the conservatives. And although he didn't like the idea of them calling him a swing vote on the court, that's what he was. He had been appointed by Reagan in 1987 and confirmed in 1988. And he was confirmed as a conservative after they had turned down Bork. And the consensus then fell upon a compromise was made Kennedy, who was not as conservative as Bork was, and wasn't quite as much of a jurist as Bork was. But he was probably about 80% of his verdicts were with the conservative parts of the court. But he would go with the liberals in some of the things as well, and such as the Obamacare and things of that sort, which you need to get out of here with the government being involved. You talk about being involved in our lives. You look at how the court court sanctioned Roberts. In this case, Roberts was a swing vote. I couldn't believe that Roberts would have gone over there and said that Obamacare was a tax under a tax provision, and he said that because Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 gives the government the power to tax. Let me ask you something. Was Obamacare initiated in the House of Representatives? The power to tax is the House of Representatives is the body that has the power to tax, and the framers put that in the House because they go before the voters every 2 years. And if they put a tax in there, and we've been fighting over taxes ever since we got here, you'd be surprised of what has been in this book by Charles Adams about the fight that we've had over taxation in this country. We fought two major wars over it. And there have been some minor wars fought over this as well. And it's amazing that we would now have the court sanctioning, as it did in the taxation issues, where the court was siding against the Constitution and allowing certain taxation policies to go through. And I'll be honest with you, that's exactly where the South rose up, because Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 says that the taxation must be uniform. And if you say it's a tax, then the uniformity issue is kicked in. And that's a problem. And that's why, and by the way, that's what we fought a civil war. We fought a war called a civil war over that. What the South was objecting to was the fact that the tariff policies, the taxation, the tariffs was the only way the government could get its money at that time. Tariffs, excise taxes, and indirect taxes. It could not directly tax the American people. And they began to pass these very exorbitant tariffs and raise the money that way. But the problem was it affected the South in a different way than it affected the northern states, and the South began to chomp at the bit and raise objections to it, and built their strength up so they would get in a position to resist it. In 1861, they did resist it. But I'm saying what I'm saying primarily here, though, is I'm saying the court has been part of the problem in the country. We always look at Congress, we look at the president. We've not looked at the court. The court has been off the rails most of the time in this country's history. You can go back and look at that through certain cases. Look at Salmon P. Chase, who, when they had the problem with John Fries, where they had risen up with a tax objection, Chase put Fry's lawyer out of the courtroom, would let his lawyer in the courtroom, and made John Fries defend himself. They were talking about having to amend the Constitution to allow certain taxation to go through. And John Marshall told them they didn't need an amendment. The Constitution will allow it for it if this is the reading of it. In other words, there were certain loopholes that they were finding. So the courts have been wishy-washy in this country's history. and been part of the problem. When I talk about the fourth estate, yes, the fourth estate in terms of the media, and there's a fifth estate also, and that's the intelligence community. But in terms of going out of control, we've had the Supreme Court. They've not been friendly to the liberties of the American people. The courts have been insidious of the rights of the American people, often siding against the American people with the tyrants or with the managers of the government, which is what Thomas Paine was concerned about. But this is very, so we're seeing the left is very agitated over this appointment, because Donald Trump will have appointed 2 members of the Supreme Court. And what do they expect him to? Who do they expect him to appoint to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court is going to be Donald Trump is going to nominate to the Supreme Court conservatives. And this court, and they're aware of it, this court is going to swing back to the Constitution. It's not swinging back to the right. It's swinging back to the founders. The founders intended for the court to be a non-active, non-partisan part of the federal government, to arbitrate disputes in the country between the branches of government, first and foremost, and also cases brought to the court, be the final arbiter of those disputes based upon the mandates and the dictates of the Constitution.
Well, it's like people, resonate well with the people, especially who are poor and have faced the judicial system on a local level for, dealings with police. It's a point to actually be made. Some people are surprised maybe by what you said about the Supreme Court ruling against the citizens and the freedoms of the citizens. But keep in mind, they, like everybody else, all the other court systems, are employed by the same people. They're paid by the same people. It's us giving them money, but how it's delved out and given to them is people who we elect, and then once they get in power, betray our trust totally. So that's not. It's on a local level. It's systemic. The possibility for corruption is systemic, and it shouldn't be anybody who's dealt with the judicial system on a local level, dealing with cops and being in front of courts and judges and stuff. That's where it comes very clear. That kind of stuff happens.
Well, John, you know that the separation of powers was intended to give authority to the 3 branches of government and make sure those corridors of power were in fact separate and distinct. You set the legislative branch up in Article 1 so that it in fact legislates or it makes the laws of the country. Then you have the second article, which is the executive branch being set up, and you have the president and the executive branch in fact enforcing the laws that are set up, that are in fact written and passed by the, in fact passed first of all by the Congress, but the check and balance system kicks in where the president and the executive branch of government then checks on the legislative branch by okaying it or vetoing the legislation. So you have that check in place. And then if the laws are passed and sanctioned by the president that go against the grain of the Constitution, then the court can come in and make sure those laws are not able to stand because the court rules against them based upon the unconstitutionality of the laws. So it's a great system that's set up. What they did not foresee is a subversion of it by each of the branches of government. Congress grabbing more authority than what is in fact delegated to it under the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. The president doing things through executive decree, and that goes outside the orbit of some of the controls are in place for the president to follow. And then the Supreme Court sanctioning things that are not allowed in the Constitution. They never thought that they would have this kind of issue to deal with. They had done as much as they could do, but then it comes down to the integrity of the office holders. And we found that remiss in all of the branches of government. The courts have been legislating from the bench. And we fear, the left fears, having a court. They talk about conservatism, but the conservative court is a court that returns to the ideas of the framers. We don't want Democrats on the court or Republicans on the court. We want constitutionalists on the court. Those will follow the Constitution. And I have had many different discussions with people. It's amazing to me, people that are brainwashed in this country. Most people in this country are brainwashed about the Constitution.
We'd like to welcome back WFOV viewers, by the way. They just got back.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
I played the music twice.
I did not hear the music, John.
Yes, I played it. So I just like, anyway, if you're just wondering, we played it right at the 26-minute mark, and then we came back. Yeah, so I played it both.
I was so much into what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too loud with it. But yeah. So then welcome back to WFOV viewers. Back. Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you having left, but I'm glad you're back. And we're not very far, as always, from where we were when you left. We don't move we move it at a turtle's pace. What I'm saying here is that it's amazing how they have, the rulers have made government something into something that was never intended to be. This idea, for example, and I've had many discussions about the Bill of Rights. I have the Constitution right here. Show me, get your Constitution out. Show me where there's a Bill of Rights in this document. There's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. In fact, if they say that there's a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, would abrogate the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. Let me read it to you. No, I won't read it to you. Let me quote it.
You can do this. I mean, I've seen you do this before, so you can do this.
John, there's absolutely I know what the teaching of the university, but I understand what they're saying. Okay, fine. They better understand what I'm saying. There's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. In fact, if there were a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, it would abrogate what's in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, and would also abrogate what is said in the introduction to the Constitution of the United States, which are seeing the issue thematically similar in both of these two documents. I'll show you where it is in the preamble to the Constitution, where there is a thematic sameness in the preamble as it is in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. When Jefferson was writing this document, Jefferson said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The most important part of it is what he says following that statement. First of all men are created equal. Then they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, he didn't say that are those rights. He said among which. In other words, there are other rights too, but the ones that are primary, that the other rights come from, is life. If you're not living, you don't have any rights. Go out in the graveyard and see how many rights they have out there. So go out there and see who's protecting their rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now you have other rights that come from those rights there. All these rights are inalienable rights. 3 of them are mentioned by name by Thomas Jefferson. Now those who say, and one person told me this last Wednesday on the 4th, on that program, said, well, that document is not the document that governs a country. The document that governs a country is the Constitution of the United States. So Moss, you fathead, didn't say fathead. Moss, you fathead, that's not the document that governs the country. That's what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. Okay, here's what the Constitution says. The preamble to the Constitution, which I think the father of the Constitution, by the way, is not James Madison. I know they say James Madison is the father of the Constitution. That's because James Madison was the one that took, only his notes survived. Everybody else got rid of their notes because they didn't want to have a record of what went on in the room there because it was supposed to be a secret. But what they were doing in that room is that they were, in fact, overthrowing the Articles of Confederation that couldn't work any day of the week, any week of the year, any year of the decade, any decade in the century. It would not have worked. The document was thrown out, but they could not say that nor let that get out before they were able to complete the document, or all they were doing in that room would have been undone by the people rising up against them going beyond their mandate that they had been sent to Philadelphia to bring up this document. And by the way, a lot of people didn't even show up because they were going to not be wasting their time. They didn't think it was going to do anything, so they just didn't show up. And then some left early. But but here's the point I'm making. The point is that they're in that room, but they're not unmindful of what had been written, what amounted to 11 years earlier. They're in that room in 1787. They were not unmindful of what Jefferson had written in 1776. They were very mindful of that. They were still alive. The ones that had created that revolution, they were still alive. They're in that room. Those revolutionaries were in that room. And when they drew up the Constitution, they wrote a introduction to it. It's not part of the Constitution, it's introduction to it to tell you what they were trying to do. And they said this in the introduction. And see if it doesn't have some thematic sameness to what's said in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. In other words, the articles did not do the job. So they're trying to form a more perfect union. Establish justice. Ensure domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Promote the general welfare. And this is the big part right here, the next sentence. And secure. Wait a minute. Let me go back and read. Go back. I'll read it this time. And secure. Let me read this from the. I'm gonna read it this time, where you won't think I'm making it up. I want you to see it in the document. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. So what does that mean? Governments are instituted to secure the rights, not to give us any, not to give us any rights, to secure the rights. Okay, fine. Let me come to the other document now. Okay, so we got to the point where it said, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure. Now, when you go back to the Constitution, look at the word blessing. That word is capitalized in the Constitution. Why is it capitalized? Because they're not talking about the blessings from government. Our rights don't come from government, and therefore they're not talking about government. They capitalize the word blessing because they're talking about what Jefferson was talking about. Inalienable rights from the Creator. And therefore, and secure the blessings from the Creator. That's why it's capitalized in the Constitution, you fatheads. I'm not the fathead, you are. Well, okay, we're both fatheads. But I'm right on this point here. Our rights do not come from government. And anybody walking around here talking about a Bill of Rights, you got to be, give me a break. You got to be kidding. There's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. I know what they're teaching. You better understand what I'm teaching. This is absolute mindlessness. That we have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. You know what you have in the Constitution? You have, first of all, when the Constitution was ratified, and go back and read the 85 Federalist Papers, 59 of them written by Alexander Hamilton. I'm sorry, 51 written by Alexander Hamilton, 29 written by James Madison, and 5 written by John Jay. You go back and read those the Federalist Papers. Some of which are more, some of them more important than others. 9 and 10 are very important. 9 was let's see, Hamilton wrote 1, and then John Jay wrote 2, 3, 4, and 5, Hamilton came back and wrote 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then the first one written by James Madison was number 10. And 9 and 10 are very important, very important, because Hillary Clinton was talking about how she had been cheated out of the election because she had more majority votes than did Donald Trump. Therefore, she should be president because look how many, she wasn't saying these words, look how many persons that were not eligible to vote voted, and she got the majority of the popular vote. Well, they guarded against that, and they explained their reasons for it in Federalist Paper 9 and 10, in which they spoke out against majorities and the tyranny of the majority, which was another thing they were fearful of, and they fixed it, and they fixed it well. And they are to be commended for having done that, their due diligence, because can you even imagine Hillary Clinton in the White House? Can you even imagine that? And now the rumor is she's trying to come back and run again in 2020. Because they're not, the left is not giving up, and they're not going to give up. They want to turn this country into a socialist state.
She's a lot like her husband. She just can't take no for an answer.
The left will not take no for an answer, John. They are continuing to fight this battle. It's like we didn't even have an election on November the 8th, 2016. They want to abrogate this election, and that's why Mueller has not been made to pack up and go home, although there is no collusion. And if there was collusion, it's not a violation of any of the laws. There's no violation here.
Even Dershowitz.
There's no legal reason for this investigation to continue.
Even Dershowitz, though, I mean, who is, always been on the left, pretty much, he says he don't believe there's collusion. He doesn't.
I have a lot of respect for him, John.
And he's taken a personal toll. I mean, I guess in his social circles, I guess he's not invited to their wine tasting parties anymore. But
Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, Martha's Vineyard. But some things I disagree with him. Obviously, I think, but he's come up. Basically, he is a constitutionalist. As much as
I give him a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Alan Dershowitz. Don't always agree with him, because who do you agree with all the time on any, what person is there on the planet that you agree with all the time? And, but one thing I'll say about Alan Dershowitz is that he's been very consistent. When they were going after Bill Clinton and brought about his impeachment, Dershowitz wrote a book about it called Sexual McCarthyism, and he was very much defending Bill Clinton. Now, I thought he was doing it because he's liberal, but he's proved me wrong, because he's making the same argument about the impropriety and really the illegality of this investigation going on to investigate a president by the deep state. And when I say deep state, I'm talking about what the deep state actually is. Deep state is those that are behind the elected officials who are not beholden to the American people, because we can't get to them because they're hiding behind the constituency that we put into power, and they're behind them, not accountable to us, but accountable to those who appoint them, and therefore the appointees are running the deep state. And that's as true now as it was in 1974, August the 9th, when they brought down the Nixon administration. The deep state brought down the Nixon administration, not the Congress of the United States. It did not happen through this document right here. The fourth estate and the fifth estate, I call the fourth estate the media. You can reverse them and have the media, the fifth estate, but I think we could say the fourth estate. And then, because we hadn't identified the fifth estate at this point, the fifth estate has been identified. Hope you've been watching it. The fifth estate is the intelligence community. And you talk about collusion, they colluded in 1974, started colluding really in 1972. The Washington Post, New York Times, the NBC, ABC, CBS, didn't have the cable at that point, and they worked together diligently to bring down the Nixon administration, and they brought him down. The intelligence community ran a coup against Richard Nixon, and so did the media. Not saying that Watergate didn't happen. I'm saying they kept Watergate in the news for 2 years, and they drove this narrative until the American people thought there must be something going on here that's very egregious, because why is it still making the news? They were creating the news over a 2-year period of time. And Bernstein and Bob Woodward, these two, what do you want to call them? Gangsters, journalistic gangsters. You talking about fake news? They did fake news for 2 years. Not saying Watergate didn't happen. I'm saying that they kept that in the newspaper for 2 years, and the fake part of it was driving the idea that somehow Washington is not a gangster institute, that the institutionalization of gangsterism is not the way Washington operates. If Washington is not a gangster institution in town, then why are we talking about draining the swamp?
Well, I'd like to know this. Anybody who puts faith in the government, ask yourself this. Why is the government opposed to people like the mafia? Because they use intimidation, force, and extreme violence. Okay, who seems to have a corner on that market? Our government does that more than anybody else. So, I mean, the analogy between them and mobsters is fairly accurate. I mean, what's the difference? What is the difference between the mafia and our government?
One puts the other one in jail if they encroach on the territory of those who are the legal mobsters. De Lorenzo's book talks about that. The book called Organized Crime. He's not talking about the mafia, or at least that mafia. He's not talking about the Cosa Nostra. He's talking about those organized gangsters in Washington. At least when you contract, who have overridden the Constitution of the United States.
Well, at least if you're doing business with the mobsters, the likelihood of getting your goods or services you're contracting them with, you're probably going to get them. They give us a false narrative. They force us to pay for goods and services we derive no benefit from, and they do it through intimidation and threats. So, who are supposed to protect us from the very people who are supposed to be in place to protect us from everybody else?
John, that is such a good point. We don't have... when you have gangsters in government, you can forget this idea that you have representation. And that is part of what is the point being made by James Ronald Kennedy and Walter Donald Kennedy in the book they put out called The South Was Right. You're not talking about the South was right in terms of slavery, but this war was not over slavery. This war, and this was not even a civil war, this is a war of Southern secession. This was a war of Southern independence. In fact, when you have celebrating independence last Wednesday, we should have brought into discussion the attempted independence on April the 4th. They did not succeed. But that's the same thing they were trying to do back there in 1861. They were succeeding from the Union because of the totalitarian aspects of the Union, and they were declaring their independence from it. And to that extent, the South was right. Not right over slavery, but this war was not over slavery. Go read, somebody should read the discussion in Britain between Charles Dickens and John Stuart Mills. They had a great debate going on about the cause of this war. John Stuart Mills, surprisingly, took the side that is over slavery. Charles Dickens, his nemesis, took the other position. They made an argument. Stuart Mill's argument, by the way, is the one they have today, that this was over slavery, and therefore they fought a war and 600,000 persons died because Lincoln wanted the slaves off the plantation, all that nonsense. That's nothing but pure nonsense. Another instrument through which government has brainwashed its citizens. This war was not over slavery. Slavery was a consequence. Slavery's ending was a consequence of the war. But somebody should read what Lincoln said in his letter to Horace Greeley on the 22nd of August, 1862. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union. It's not to free the slaves, but to save the Union. If I could do it by freeing none of the slaves, I would do it. If I could do it by freeing some of the slaves, leaving others alone, I would do it. But what I do about slavery and the colored race, I do it because it preserves the Union. And what he did in '63 was issue the Emancipation Proclamation as a way of preserving the Union, because the South was not coming back into the Union, although they had said, come back and your slaves will be okay and all of that. In fact, Lincoln was willing to support the 13th Amendment that would have made slavery exist on the land space in perpetuity, where you could not get rid of it unless you pass another constitutional amendment to get it out of the Constitution. They were talking about passing an amendment to make slavery perpetual in the country. And Lincoln was supportive of that. So that's brainwashing too. But this idea we have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, there is no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And you can't show it to me. All you scholars teaching that nonsense. Here's Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of their grievance. And that is nothing other than government set up, instituted among men in order to secure the liberties that are inalienable. Government does not give us any rights, and therefore government cannot put out a Bill of Rights, because the government is not giving us our rights. We have to keep government from taking our rights. And they got us thinking in reverse, as if government gives rights out. And people believe that. There is no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And I've asked our scholars to show them to me. You keep saying it, that we got a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. All I ask you to do is show it. Show it to me. And if we take that notion that that is true, then if government gives us our rights, then when we get the wrong government in power, what the government can do is take the rights from us. And we don't want that, do we? We don't want the government, somebody getting there as a maniac, maybe another, well, we've had some maniacs in there. And we think we got, we got a person now that we're calling Hitler. We don't have Hitler in there. What we have in there now, and we don't know what we're looking at. We have a president now that is more in line with following the Constitution and mandates, restricting government, taking regulations off the book. We got a person there following the Constitution more closely now than we probably had in our lifetime.
Reagan, he was always touted to being the anti-government president, and he did during his administration. A lot of stuff was enacted, a lot of organizations created that would violate the spirit of the Constitution. So
Reagan is not my prototype of a great president. He did better than some of the others, but Reagan is what started this problem of legitimizing these people that break into this country, and all he did was open Pandora's box. Now everybody's trying to come in here, and they're talking about separating the children. You're separating children in Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade separates children, and it separates the children from their parents permanently, and nobody's talking about it. And they're talking about control your body and so on and so forth. Let me tell you what's getting ready to happen here tonight. Donald Trump, the conservative president, who's been more conservative than most persons thought he would be, and that's why they're objecting to it. They thought he'd be wishy-washy. They thought he would begin to try to appease the left and go over there and try to win them over because they do not like this president. And Donald Trump is not fainted over to the left. And they don't like the idea of this man being solidly running the policies they ran on. We elected a person who said he's going to do X, Y, and Z in the conservative camp, and he's been doing that. And they are not going to accept this president or anything he does. And tonight they're going to be, no matter who he appoints, they're going to be hollering about the appointee because they know what Donald Trump is doing. And what Donald Trump is doing is trying to return this country to constitutional order. This country's out of control. And those persons talking about, I hear this a lot too. They say that the left is unhinged. They talk about Trump derangement syndrome. That's not true. That's not true either. This is not Trump derangement syndrome. This is the liberal mind being brought out into the public limelight so we can see what really is there. I mean, you listen to people like they had Cornel West on what program was that last week? Had him on Tucker Carlson show, one of the best shows on television, and had Cornel West. Cornel West is a madman.
Well, they do need comedy relief once in a while, though.
Every once in a while, he comes on there and gives his utopian vision. The reason why, when they ask him about socialism, the reason why it's not worked is because every time they've gotten out there in Venezuela, then here comes these other people from the outside that squelch the great idea of having everybody equal and even in society. And by having the idea out there, every time they've had it, somebody came in and interfered with it. And that's why it doesn't work. The reason why it doesn't work is because you cannot incentivize people not being selfish. The reason why people produce anything is they do it because of their own selfish interests. Is that 5 minutes, John, or 1 minute? Is that 5 minutes or 1 minute?
I was away from the phone. I remember I held the sign. What did you say?
Was that 1 minute or 5 minutes?
We got 1 minute. Yeah, a little bit less than 1 minute. Yeah.
We're going to wrap it up. But tonight when the president makes his choice, and I would like to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett get it, because I think we need to have a woman on that court that can silence the voice of the three tenors on there, and that's those three women that are leftists to the bone. They don't even care about the Constitution of the United States. But I don't think it's going to pour on her. I think the person that's going to get it is going to be, it's two people, either Kavanaugh or it's going to be Thomas Hardiman. That's my prediction. But I would like to see Judge Amy Barrett get it, because I think we need to neutralize some of those voices on the court. And when Roe v. Wade is overturned, which I'm predicting is going to happen, I would like to have some woman on the court that we can then say that it wasn't just men making that ruling. Anyway, let's get out of here. We'll see you again next week. Want you, as always, to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.